Greetings, everybody. I'm Damon. I'm the library director here at the library. Very excited to welcome John Felton in his baby bird presentation today. Just as a little reminder, this will be on CTSB probably in a couple weeks, so if anyone wants to watch it again, you'll be able to watch it on CTSB from either the TV or on your computer through YouTube. So you can always watch it again, which is always great. Thanks for coming, John, and thank you, everybody, for coming.
Great.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Yep.
So thank you, Damon and Mary, and also especially, she's not here, but Michelle, who actually was the one who did most of the arranging of these pictures on Saturday. I had a general idea what I wanted, but not a very good one. So I want to also thank Marty, my wife and birding partner, who undoubtedly saw many of these birds before I did. So without her, I wouldn't have seen them. So, and I want to thank CTSB for filming this once again. And thanks all of you for coming here today. I really appreciate your being here. So I'm doing this exhibit now and this talk now because May and June are the height of the nesting season here in our part of the world. Many birds came here from Central America, South America, to nest and raise their little birds. They did not come here for tanglewood or any of our other cultural highlights. They came here for one reason mainly, and that is we have lots of insects to feed their young. It's not working? Is that better? Yes. Okay. So they came here for the insects, and so the next time you're swatting those mosquitoes in the backyard, please remember that the birds are using them to feed their young as well. So, and also when you hear birds singing in your backyard or anywhere around you, the odds are pretty good that they have a nest here. The males are singing to defend their territory against interlopers. And so there's a pretty good sign that there is a nest around. So this little picture here in the cover is part of my message, one of my messages of this program today, and that is that human babies come in a variety of sizes and colors, but they're all pretty clearly human babies to us. They're obviously not a giraffe or a mountain lion or some other mammal. But baby birds, when they're little, don't necessarily look at all like their adults. And this is a pretty good example. These two little chicks were among four that I saw this one day a couple years ago. And this is their mom. I think their mom. Could be their dad, because the Virginia rail, both the parents feed the chicks and take care of them. And Virginia rail is a very hard to see marsh bird. It works in the marshes, and getting to see an adult is really a special opportunity. Getting to see some of the chicks is really special. It was really exciting to me to see them that one day. And back, just a reminder that the little chicks here are about the size of a cotton ball. So I have just 2 pages with lots of words on them. This is one of them. It kind of explains the overall concept of what I'm doing here today. So I have photos of nestlings, fledglings, and juveniles, depending on what I happen to see. And all are really young birds. Not really, some of them are baby birds, but they're all young birds. So this is a pretty good example of what I mean by the young birds don't necessarily look like the adult. This gray blue heron, the adult, and almost all these slides, the adult is the little bit picture on the left, the young bird is the bigger picture on the right. And you can see here that the young great blue heron has a totally different colored bill. It's kind of grayish, maybe a little bit of black on it, where the adult is a very bright orange or yellow. The adult is in full breeding plumage. He's ready to go out and dance. The leg color is a little different, but the feathers are really totally different on the young bird. And that's true of most of the ones you'll see later on. The first section is all herons, and this is the green heron, which is a little one about the size of a crow. It's a really beautiful bird. Although it's called a green heron, it's really mostly blue on the back and red on the front. The juvenile on the right here has kind of a reddish bill, and you can see that's the remaining pin feathers. You know, these little tiny feathers that crop up on his head. Different colored legs. It looks somewhat like its parent, but not, well, I'm not sure this was actually its parent, but an adult, it's not really the same. The yellow-crowned night heron is one we do not have here in the Berkshires. You have to go to a place like Florida to see one, generally. The juvenile here, I don't know how old this is. Glenn, do you have any idea how old this might be?
No more than a year.
Yeah. And
First year.
Yeah, it'd be first year. And the adult on the left shows why it's called yellow-crowned night heron. It has a nice yellow head. This is the black-crowned night heron, which does occasionally make it to the Berkshires. It's a big deal when it does. Birders get all excited when they see it. But these nestlings were actually taken at a rehab center that my friend Lynn and Dave took us to. And they were actually in a nest that was inside the rehab center. I had to take a picture through the netting, and they actually turned out. I was thrilled to see them. But these birds are basically as big as the adults, but they don't look like the adult at all. This is another Florida bird that we do not have here in the Berkshires. And the juvenile on the left is, you can see the differences between them. It starts out being all brown, and it gradually transfers to being mostly white, or all white. The color of the bill is different. It's the same size as the adult, but it'll be that way in a while. Sandpipers, when people think of sandpipers, you think you're talking about being at the ocean. And it's true that while many sandpipers are at the ocean, we do have tons of sandpipers here in the Berkshires, other inland places, as long as there's water around. And the spotted sandpiper is one of our more common ones. This little baby here, I think, was probably a day old. Maybe 2 days old, but it was really, really young. And you can tell the little stripe goes through the eye is the one commonality. Killdeer is actually a plover, but it's similar to the other sandpipers. It's one that we see here in the Berkshires pretty regularly. If you want to see one, go to Utility Drive in Pittsfield, just off of Holmes Road. They're pretty common there. The piping plover is an endangered bird. It nests on the beach. Not just ocean beaches, but also the beaches of big lakes like Lake Erie and Lake Michigan. And nesting on the beach was probably a good idea back, thousands of years ago, but since the age of Coppertone and beach buggies and stuff like that, it's been a rather fraught experience for them. And most places where they do nest, they are protected. A good example is Plum Island in Massachusetts at Newburyport, where they close the entire beach all summer long so these birds can nest there. Imagine an Atlantic Ocean beach where you can't go swimming, but they protect the big birds. This little baby is also a cotton ball. I call it a cotton ball on toothpicks. It's really about that big. And you can tell its size by looking at some of the rocks next to it. Everybody now knows about Canada geese, but those of us of a certain age remember not that long ago when Canada geese were pretty rare. We didn't have very many of them. And now they're overabundant, especially if you play golf or have a big backyard. The little goslings are really, really darling until they grow up to be Canada geese. Mallard is our most common duck that we have here. They are, and you can see mallards here basically 12 months out of the year, some months more often than others, but they are here a lot. These little babies I saw at Jackson Pond up in, down in Stockbridge. And kind of what I think is probably a sad story there. I saw these ducklings one beautiful day. There was no mom around. I waited around for quite a while to see a mom that saw none. Went back the next day and I didn't see any ducklings. That, you know, I don't know what happened to them, but maybe they were off somewhere in the marsh that I couldn't see. But ducklings without a mom to guard them and protect them are pretty vulnerable. I mean, they're vulnerable to begin with, but really vulnerable without an adult parent to protect them. Wood ducks are really beautiful ducks, the male particularly on the left-hand side, the colorful one. But the babies are really pretty too. Hooded merganser, a fairly common duck here, mostly in the late fall, early winter, and early spring. The male is really a spectacular bird, but the female is really pretty. And normally they have a brood of 3 or 4 chicks, 3 or 4 ducklings. Marty and I saw this one with just one, which indicates that, you know, the other 2, something happened to them. And which reminds me that one thing about baby birds is that something like 3/4 of all baby birds, no matter what the species is, 3/4 overall don't survive. Only about 1/4 survive to adulthood, which explains why they have so many chicks to begin with. But for ducks, you know, things like snapping turtles and other predators really take a toll. Some people are surprised to know that we have common loons here in the Berkshires. You think of the loon as being something you see up in the Maine woods, upper Vermont, but we do have loons here, mostly in the off-season, you know, mostly in the winter and the fall, and sometimes in the spring. This juvenile was a Stockbridge bull, and we were seeing loons pretty regularly up until a few weeks ago when people started getting their motorboats and other things out on the water. The common gallinule used to be known as the common moorhen, and it's really a spectacular bird with that big red crescent on its head. I was fortunate one day to see this one feeding. Actually had three little babies. Got this really nice photo. It's feeding one of them. They're a marshland bird mostly. The pied-billed grebe is a little teeny duck. One of my favorite ducks. I think they're so cute. And the juvenile, the baby, this one is probably just a few days old, is called a zebra head because of the white stripes on its head. And they're not common to see. Everybody knows bluebirds. They are just about one of everybody's favorite birds. But this one day down at Laurel Lake, I got to see six little babies. And managed to get 4 of them in one photograph. Marty refers to them as little blue jewels. They're just so darling. Cedar waxwing is one of my very favorite birds. I just love them, and I think you can tell why from the photos. The adult has this little tufted head, a Lone Ranger mask, the little bit of red on its wings that gives it its name, waxwing, as in sealing wax, and the yellow band on the tail. The juvenile, which is just a few days old, has a bit of the tuft, starting to get the Lone Ranger mask, has none of the red on the wings, and there's just a little hint of the yellow on the tail. They'll grow into all those things. Everybody knows robins, one of our most common birds. But and a lot of people have robin nests, in and around their houses. But how often do you see baby robins? They're there, and they are really interesting how they grow into adulthood, gradually get the orange reddish breast. Song sparrow, another one of our very common birds. This is one case where the juvenile, which is pretty young, looks on the left, looks pretty much like the adult, except that it's got the beak is a little different. You can tell, and it is pouting, calling for more food. The swamp sparrow is, for my money, one of the most beautiful of all the sparrows. They're not easy to see unless one happens to perch up on a cattail or something in a marsh, but they're really beautiful birds. And the youngster here, which looks a lot like it actually, is also a really pretty bird. House finch is a fairly common bird. It's actually a western bird that has migrated to the eastern U.S. And that's the male on the left there, the adult male. And I assume this is a baby male on the right. The dark-eyed junco is the original snowbird, but with the inverse of the meaning. It doesn't go to Florida in the wintertime. It likes to go to colder temperatures. Now in the summer season, dark-eyed juncos will be going up to the mountains, going farther north. They don't like they're like me. They don't like hot weather. But they're really pretty. Mourning dove, I think most people know the call of the mourning dove. It is a morning call of the ewe. This little baby I happened to see, I think was probably just a few days out of the nest. It was really exciting. I'd never seen a young mourning dove before. So, open mouth policy here for these little fledglings, the barn swallows. Those of you who've been parents probably know what an open mouth means, but this one, they are being pretty insistent. Another open mouth. This is the eastern kingbird, which is it's a flycatcher, meaning that it lives off insects. The phoebe is another one of my favorite birds. It's one of the birds that says its name, Phoebe, except it's a really hoarse call, squeak, Phoebe, baby, like that. The adult, despite being just basically brown and with a little bit of white on his belly, I think the phoebe is a really beautiful bird. Although most of the guidebooks describe it as being drab. But the juvenile's drab right now. It'll get to be the pretty bird a little bit later on. The yellow warbler is our most common warbler that we have here in the summertime. This is a female on the left-hand side because I think both of these babies are females. I'm not sure about that, but. And I saw about a half dozen this morning at Laurel Lake. There's actually a nest at Laurel Lake that's right by the road that you can go see. And this is one of those rare cases when you get to see the dad actually bringing food to the little chicks. This is the American redstart male. There's a great, interesting story about this nest. This pair of American redstarts built a little nest in a little teeny fork of a small tree at Parsons Marsh 2 years in a row. Had to be the same birds. These birds go to Venezuela and Colombia for the wintertime. Then they come back up here for the summer. I don't really know the explanation for how these little birds could come here to the Berkshires and find the same tree in the same spot, but somehow they did. I couldn't do that. Even with GPS, there's no way I could do that. Siri would not tell me about that fork in that tree. And this is a fledgling that's right out of the nest. I think it had been out maybe a day. The common yellowthroat is another one of our, probably our second or third most common, the warblers that's here in the summertime. This is a female on the left-hand side because I think this juvenile is a female as well. The male has another bird with a Lone Ranger mask. Very pretty bird. The blue-headed vireo is kind of related to the warbirds. It's an insectivore. They travel here in the summertime to build these nests. Marty and I found this nest at Pleasant Valley Wildlife Sanctuary a couple years ago, I think, maybe 3 years ago. We just happened to be walking on a trail and we looked over and we saw this birds flying in and out of a little bush and went over, and sure enough there was this nest. So we went back every day or not every day, every few days for a couple weeks or so until the babies appeared. Then I took these photos of the babies and then went back one day and they were gone. So no idea what happened to them, but hopefully some of them survived. The bobolink, another one of my very favorite birds. The bobolink is a grassland nesting bird. And that's another case like the plover where nesting in grasslands was really good, several hundred years ago before we started mowing them and planting corn in giant fields. There are very few places now where they can nest. Edith Wharton Park, actually down next to the lake, is one of them. McAllister Refuge in Great Barrington is another. Field Farm in Williamstown is another. There are several here, but not very many. And the male on the left is a very handsome fellow. He perches up on some grassland sticks to protect the nest and display himself, while the female does the hard work down below. This is a youngster we saw in Ohio a couple years ago. The crow. Who thinks about baby crows? There are, in fact, baby crows have to be babies like everybody else. And so Marty and I were lucky to see this one up in Pittsfield a few years ago. And the grackle. The grackle doesn't have a very good reputation among birders and people in general, but it's a really beautiful bird. If you look at the male is really iridescent blue, and the female is pretty handsome too. And we happened to see this one feeding two of the chicks. There was maybe, Melissa was there, maybe 20 feet away off the boardwalk at Parsons Marsh. It was really neat. And this one was right opposite where the grackle was, this baby blackbird, which had to be just gotten out of the nest. I mean, it's such a little baby. And I'm pretty sure it's a female, and I have a picture of a female about to feed one of its chicks on the left there. Rose-breasted grosbeak is a really gorgeous bird. It's known as a cutthroat. I think you can see why. The red on the breast there. This is the male. And they sing, they go high in the trees, and they sing and sing and sing. They're known as a robin that had voice lessons. They sing much more beautifully than a robin does. Unmistakable singing. The cardinal. This baby cardinal happened to be in our backyard, and it was a really hot day, and it was really sweltering. The Baltimore oriole. How many people here know that we have Baltimore orioles here in the Berkshires? I mean, they're a fairly common bird here from late April on through August or so. I mean, I saw two this morning at Laurel Lake. So this is a baby female right here. That's the male on the left, obviously. And here is the male is feeding it. The gray catbird is another one of those birds that it only has two colors, gray with a little black cap, although there's a little bit of red under its tail. But it's still a really striking looking bird. But there's no way you would ever identify the female, the youngster as being a catbird. It does not look like a catbird at all, but it is. So the red-bellied woodpecker, one of our larger woodpeckers. This is a very young male who is going to have the red head that the male has on the side there. You can see little traces of red all along the head there. But I have another red-headed woodpecker coming up here. And this is the true red-headed woodpecker that's mostly in the Midwest. One made it to South Berkshire a few weeks ago. But we see them pretty regularly in Ohio when we go there. But I'm going to take you back to the red-bellied woodpecker, which has a little wash of red on its belly. And then this is the red-headed. And they're totally different birds. And this is a flicker, which is a pretty common bird here. It has one of the most interesting diets of all birds. It basically eats one thing, ants. Loves ants. Scoops them up by the dozens or hundreds. And it'll patrol trees looking for ants. And it makes a really weird sounds. This is the yellow-bellied sapsucker, and that name is not a joke. You know, it's not like this three-breasted seersucker or whatever, but it lives off, it sucks the sap out of trees and the insects that come along with it. Sandhill crane is one of the largest birds in America. The whooping crane is a little bit bigger. The common crane, I think, is about the same size. It's not as heavy as a turkey, but it's a tall bird. And we do have a breeding pair in the Berkshires. It does breed every year, and I have taken photos of the baby. It's called a colt. And I have taken some photos. I wasn't really very happy with them. So when we were in Ohio a couple weeks ago, we heard about this one at a reservation where we've been, and so we went there, and we were lucky enough to see this one colt, who is, as you can tell from the picture on the left, is about a third the size of the adult. I've never seen a really little baby. Down to the opposite side, the hummingbird. How many people here know where the ruby-throated hummingbird spends the winter? Spends the winter in South America. How does it get there? It flies over the Gulf of Mexico. This is a bird that weighs 1/10 of 1 ounce. 1/10 of 1 ounce. And yet it somehow survives storms and all sorts of other things to cross the Gulf of Mexico. It does this year after year. I mean, they don't live very long, but it does do that. Red-tailed hawk is our most common hawk. It's the one you often see in, high up in trees. And this youngster here is starting to get the signs of adulthood. Not quite there yet, but it'll soon look like the adult on the left. So bald eagles. Many people don't know that a bald eagle is not born bald. They're born with lots of black feathers on their head and on their tails. This one here is, I took this in May, a year ago in Ohio. You can see this is the white tail of the parent right here, and that's the black tail of one of the other nestlings. There were 2 of them at the time. The eagles get their white heads and white tails between their 4th and 5th year. They're slow bloomers. And here's an immature that is starting to get a little more coloration. Not there yet. So this is my only video, and apologies because this was handheld, and so there's a little bit of motion there, but also pay attention to what the mom does toward the end of the video. She's feeding them fish. Ospreys eat fish. And you can see a couple of the other ones are getting a little impatient, but they're waiting their turn. She couldn't help it. Okay. So here's the last slide, which another one with lots of words. So that's it. So does anybody have any questions?
So do they only lay eggs once a year?
No. Well, it depends on the species. Some species will brood 2 or 3 times a year, like robins, for example. If the first nest doesn't go really well, they'll do it again and then again. Bigger birds will only do it once a year. You know, like the eagles and the ospreys and birds like that. Many of the smaller birds will do at least a couple of times. It really depends on the species and the weather and the year, you know, all that sort of stuff. It's pretty variable. John?
Do male birds participate in the incubation process?
Well, that's an interesting question, and the answer is it depends. There are many species where the male, there are some species where the male, after copulation, exit the scene. You know, is not around at all. There are other species where the male is a full-time partner. In eagles, for example, the males will do some of the incubation. They don't, and some of the feeding. They'll they'll feed the mom while she's incubating, and will maybe come and help feed the youngsters. There are other species where the male is, you know, kind of a full-time partner, does half the incubation or maybe more, or like the redstart, where the male's job is to bring food to the babies and or the female. So it really depends on the species. There's the whole range. Just as in humans, you know, there are some males that are. Yeah, I don't need to go there, right? Yes, sir.
You mentioned that hummingbirds have a short lifespan. How many, do you know, on average, how many migratory trips they make to South America and back north?
I do not know the answer to that, but my suspicion is it's probably just 1 or 2. You know, most little birds don't live more than a year or 2. I mean, the ones that survive to adulthood, most don't live more than a year or 2. Some will, you know, live, like for example, the dark-eyed junco that I showed you the picture of. A friend has been banding them for a number of years, And he he teaches at MCOA, and he just did a post the other day saying that he had recaptured a bird that he had banded 5 years ago in the exact same location. So it was like, I think, fair way to say it, like 20 meters away. So that little bird somehow had survived for 5 years and came back to the same place, which tells you a lot. I know juncos are ones that are, there are many birds that are called site specific. You know, they're very loyal to the site they were raised in, and they'll come back over and over and over again. And the junco is one of them.
When you're IDing juveniles, are you looking for the parent? I mean, they're confusing, right? I mean, we're not used to
They're really
seeing
confusing, yeah.
So are you looking for the parent so you're sure you know what it is?
Yeah, I'm looking for the parents to make sure I know what it is. It's interesting because when I started doing this, I had all these pictures that I thought, you know, might be juveniles. I wasn't sure about it. If you, there's an app called Merlin, you can show your photos to it, and Merlin will come back and kind of give you an idea. But Merlin's not, like all artificial intelligence, Merlin's not always right. And one thing I found interesting is that very few guidebooks have lots of pictures of baby birds. There are very few pictures. And so I found it really hard. I had to read a lot. I had to go through quite a few different guidebooks, make some guesses. Sometimes I was wrong. I think all the ones I have here are correct, but you know, if someone else says say I'm wrong, I'm happy to retract it. So, but yeah, that's interesting because a lot of these birds, especially the really famous ones that are iconic, the males in particular are pretty obvious. You know, like the yellow warbler, or the Baltimore oriole. It's really obvious who that is, but it's not always obviously who the offspring are, and because they do not look like the adults, and so that was quite a challenge for me. Spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. Yeah.
John, I had a question about once the bird has young, do they have a yearly nest, or do they once? Is it the same thing? Some birds only once in their lives, and others every year after year? Most
birds they get a new nest. The only ones that really will go back to the same nest over and over again are like the big raptors, like eagles. But even then, they will come back and they'll refresh the nest every year. Like you know, many of you know that I've been watching a bald eagle nest down at Oral Lake for several years now, and that nest has always failed because I don't know why, for whatever reason. But they do bring new sticks to that nest every year. Some of them really big sticks because their eagles are big birds. Osprey nests. There's an osprey nest there's one here in Lee. But I've been watching an osprey nest up in Lenox for several years now. And that nest blew down in a storm 3 or 4 years ago. So they had to come back and rebuild that entire gigantic nest. There's a lot of work goes into that. The little baby birds, actually one statistic I read fairly recently is somebody watched a female American redstart, the one with the male bringing the food to the babies. Somebody watched, I assume this is a graduate student who got this as an assignment, sat there and watched. The female who was building the nest made 650 trips to the nest over a matter of, I think it was 4 or 5 days. This kept going and coming and going and coming and coming. You know, think about doing that. You know, we go to Target or Walmart or someplace. Marty.
Birds that have two or three foods in a year often use the same nest for that year.
Yeah.
You know, a rabbit wouldn't go and build a new nest unless there was something wrong with it. You know, it got infested with insects or something.
That's true. Yeah, a lot of them will reuse that same nest if they're going to do another brood. We had robins for years and years who brooded under our deck, and we saw them do that. And some birds are really good about removing. Actually, most birds are good about removing the fecal material from the nest. one way or the other. Some are terrible about it, but they try to do that. Peter?
Yeah, when these young birds are fledged or ready to go out on their own, do they build a nest, or is nesting only a part of breeding?
Nesting is only a part of breeding.
So then these young birds that come up, they're just going to stay around until they're ready to fly home, so fly away from
Yeah,
the winter.
a bird that's born, like for example, like the bobolink, for example. The bobolinks I've watched down at Laurel Lake. They're born here. Bobolink is an interesting example where bobolinks, the male comes first, usually in early May. The female comes a week or 2 or 3 later, and this is fairly typical in many species. The male scopes out the territory. Then the female comes and builds a nest. The male kind of hangs around and, does male type things. And not sure what that is. He goes to the bar, and he sits around, swaps stories about the game last night, stuff like that. And then they have the chicks, and they both feed the chicks. And then the male leaves. And then a few weeks later, the female leaves. And then the bobolinks who have never been to Colombia or Venezuela, they get up and they leave and they fly to Colombia or Venezuela. So that's, that's fairly typical of a lot of the birds that, especially that are long distance migrants. Well,
what's the story on that rookery, the heron rookery on Swamp Road?
Well, I don't know. They all born. There was on Swamp Road in Pittsfield, just south of the airport. For many years, there was a big heron rookery that had, at one point I counted 16 nests, or 16 or 18 nests. And then there was a big winter storm several years ago that blew down most of them. And then the last few years it's been down to like 5 or 6 nests. And Marty and I drove by the other day, didn't see any in there, none. We saw a couple of nests, but no birds in them. So, winter storms do a lot of damage to that sort of thing. When you're having a big nest that's high up in a spindly tree on a marsh, they can get damaged pretty easily. Marty and I were just a couple weeks ago, we were at Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge in upstate New York between Syracuse and Rochester. And we went up on one observation tower where you could see a heron rookery off to the side. They call it a rookery, where a whole bunch of herons come and congregate. You can see this heron rookery off to the side. I counted 150 herons in nests there. A much better birder than I had been there a couple of days before, and he had counted 275. That number was just unbelievable to me. I mean, a heron is a really big bird, and to see that many of these really big, really special birds was quite...
It's interesting, is that these are they're dying trees in these big swamps, and obviously winds are going to knock them down, and then where are those ferns going to go? Because that's the kind of tree they need.
Yeah.
Obviously, these rookeries do move. At least I've never done any reading about it, so I really don't know. But they do have to move. They can't survive.
Yeah, and like where have those herons who used to nest here, where are they nesting now? I don't know. But that may be one explanation for why I've seen many fewer herons in the last few years than I had seen before. Maybe they're breeding over in, Columbia County instead or somewhere else. I just haven't seen as many as I used to. Dave?
You noticing any difference caused by climate change on when the birds are breeding, fledging?
Well, a lot of people are doing studies on that. Cornell's trying to get an idea. Basically, from what I've read, the consensus is that birds are migrating a little bit earlier than they used to, like a day or 2 or 3. The big difference is that the climate has had a huge impact on their food, on insects, which are hatching out much earlier than they used to hatch out. So by the time the birds get here, there's not as much food available as there used to be. And that's really true up in the far north, the Arctic, where by the time the birds get there, there's not enough food left for them to feed their young, and so a lot of Arctic breeding species are in serious trouble. So, yeah, the answer is that the birds have not changed that much yet. You know, birds have evolved over hundreds of thousands of years, and they can't evolve as fast as climate change is happening. There's just no way that can happen. So, you know, maybe 50 years from now, they'll be able to be a little bit earlier, but by then, who knows what will happen. It's a sad story.
You mentioned about the males coming first, like we've noticed the ruby throated hummingbirds come first, and bobolinks, and I'm sure a lot of others. Do they scout out nest places?
Yes, they scout out territories. They choose territories, and then they try to, depending on the species, most species that are not life pairs, they try to attract a female to their territory. I've picked this really special spot. You need to come here and mate with me because this is the greatest spot around. And I'm a healthy, vigorous male. You know, I'm going to pass on my good genes, that sort of thing. But yeah, the males do try to scout out good territories for the females, and the females have the choice. In most, well, all bird species, really, the females are the ones with the choice. And they'll just say, go away, bud. John?
Nesting boxes, how often should they be cleaned out?
They should be cleaned out at the end of the season. Or if you've seen a bluebird, for example, or house wren's nest in a box, and then they leave and they're gone for a little bit of time, I would clean it out then and then wait. Maybe they'll have a second brood, but it depends. If you look at the nest and it looks really cruddy, then I would clean it out. If it looks like it's in pretty good shape and they've really taken care of it, they've really moved all the fecal material and stuff, then you could leave it. But I would clean it out at the end of the season. You know, like in late August, September. Which reminds me that species are breeding now. A couple species that breed a little bit later in the season. Goldfinch is one. The cedar waxwing is another. They don't breed really until July or so. So there is a little bit of a later nesting season. They don't even start until later on. So, but now is the peak time for everybody.
If you were going to plant plantings to attract birds, what would be the optimum choices?
Well, for most birds here, the optimum choices are native plants. You know, ones that should be here. And I'm not an expert on that, but I would go. You know, there are lots of books that talk about native planting, and some of the garden centers like Ward's and Gray Barrington, they are really attuned to that. And you know, that I would always seek out expert advice. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Marty. And thank you, CTSV. And we have some postcards there. So if you would like to get the channel numbers where you'll see this program, or go on YouTube under the Lee Library, and you'll also see John's earlier programs. But I hope you'll stay and look around because John and Marty have done an incredible job on putting together these photos. So thank you once again. We really appreciate all you've done.
Well, thank you
so much.
And there's some behind the screen here, so I don't know how that goes up.